Hello and welcome to our podcast called Just Us, a podcast about racial reconciliation and justice from a Christian point of view. My name is Bill Roberts, and I'm going to serve as the moderator, and I have with me my friend, Pastor Hanz Jouissance, and Mimi Weithers Bruce, and Dr. John Brunt, and we're happy to have you with us. And our goal in this podcast is, from a Christian point of view, to talk about the issue of racial reconciliation and justice. And we're going to begin by just introducing ourselves and telling a little bit about our journey in this issue of racial reconciliation. So I would like to start, Mimi, with you. Why is this issue important to you, and what is the issue of racial reconciliation?
Hello, everyone. This issue about racial reconciliation, justice, equity is deeply important to me. I've been influenced my whole life by it. Growing up in different cultures, I have deep West Indian roots, and I come from a very conservative Seventh-day Adventist family. And that has shaped a lot of my views about the world. And at times I have believed it was very narrow and very protected viewpoint of the world. And it wasn't until we moved to New York City where that whole bubble burst and reality took place, very literally. I think the first experience that I wanted to understand was there's a lot of race riots in the mid-'80s in Brooklyn, where we lived in New York City. And that shaped my view. I didn't understand it. So watching what happened, a lot of profiling with my brothers and my cousins and my uncles in the city. And then some of my own experiences have shaped I have a deep sense of fairness and justice. And for me, I can't tolerate injustice. It affects me deeply, whether it's on the news or someone close to me or just anybody else. It's important to me that people are treated equally and fairly. And so my faith has also, just reading the Bible and the life of Jesus and how he lived his ministry, also showed me that he was all about fairness and justice. And that is how he wants us to be, to represent him and his kingdom. And I believe it's very important for all of us to realize that our lives be led in that path. Because the world is watching us, especially if we call ourselves Christians. We have to live a life of justice. One of my favorite Bible verses is Micah 6:8. And I think that to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God is what we're required to do. That is the answer to the question. And we have many examples in the Bible of that. So I'm really glad to be here to discuss this topic. I think it's timely and it is necessary to get into good trouble, necessary trouble, to address this topic and to move forward as believers and as brothers and sisters in Christ.
Mimi, let me ask you a question. You're a mother.
Yes.
Of two boys.
Yes.
As an African-American mother, what is this issue like for you?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. My boys are 17 and 15 and 16. He just turned 16. And raising young black men in America, it gives me some angst. And because I don't know, they're not cute little boys anymore. No, they've switched from being cute to a target now. And for me, it's important that they know they are valued.
Yes.
They are loved. They are cared for. They are special. Because sometimes the world won't see them that way. And doesn't matter what they're wearing, their educational status, whatever, they're just viewed as a threat sometimes because of the color of their skin. And for me as their mother, I want to instill in them the importance of knowing whose they are, and why it's important for them to be to do the best that they can, and not take up the societal drama. It doesn't always work because sometimes I pass my fears on to them, which sometimes I can't help, but I do. But yeah, my hope for them is to rise above what is happening now, and to know that they are valued and loved in this space.
So how you view this issue is sharpened by the fact you are a mother, so you're the protector of two African-American boys. Young men in America.
Yes.
That heightens.
It does. It heightens because I have talked to them. I think it was, son was 11, 12, my oldest. That's when we had the sit-down conversation and said, this is how you have to comport yourself in public. This is, I said, I was crying. It was sad, but I said, this is, when the police come around, this is how you behave. No more water guns outside, no more, not even inside. Somebody can be looking through the window or see something and call the police. So that's when it started, when I had to sit down with them and say, no, to these certain things. And I had to tell them why, and they didn't always understand because they wanted to play with their friends. And I'm like, no, you can't. You stay inside with those. Don't take the water guns outside for your own protection. And then it moved on to Trayvon Martin with the hoodie. That's when we had to change their dress style. My husband pretty much instilled that in them about what they wore. And even he was affected. He doesn't even want to drive over the speed limit, which drives me nuts because it's too slow. But that's his fear. And now my boys are starting to drive, and that's another. So there's like anxiety on top of anxiety on top of anxiety. I don't like that feeling, but I still think it's important for them to experience life and not to be sheltered to the point where they can't become responsible adults, young men, but also to let them know that this is the world we live in now. And you still have to, even though you have to walk worthy, you really have to pay attention to your surroundings. And we're telling you this because it's the reality we live in.
So just listening to you, Mimi, it sounds to me like this is something every single day you think about this issue, you're aware of it, and it's part of your just like, do I have my keys? Do I have my wallet? Do I have my phone? It's the issue of racial issues is part of your daily thought process.
I think about it often because it's a part of who I am.
Yeah.
I can't not think about it. I can say, what's going to happen today? And how am I going to deal with it? What is my attitude going to be? That is what I deal with it every day. I have to make sure that I'm not a ticking time bomb. Right. And a lot of times I feel that way in this world we're living in right now. Yeah. But I believe it's important to speak up when I need to speak up, when it's necessary. Yeah. And to stand when I need to stand for my boys, for anybody else who's facing some kind of oppression or injustice. And if I'm around, I can't be silent. I shouldn't be silent about it. Yeah. But I don't want to make that be like the racial issues absorb me and take me down, because I don't want that in my heart, but I'm aware of it. Right. I know it exists. I cannot ignore it.
It's personal.
It is very personal. Yeah. Not just for me, for a lot of other people, but for me, it's not something I'm going to ignore and be silent about.
Mimi, could you just pull your mask down just for a moment, so the people who are watching can get to see. Okay. What you're.
Hi, everybody.
Who you are.
This is me.
Thank you very much, Mimi.
You're welcome.
Hans, tell us for you, what has this issue been like in your life?
Hi, everyone. I am Hans. How has what issue been?
The issue of racial reconciliation and justice. This whole issue. What has your journey been in your life in regards to this issue?
So, as Mimi was saying, I'm also Caribbean. So I was born in Haiti, And I came to America in Brooklyn, New York also when I was 3 years old. So my household isn't like an African-American household, if that makes sense.
It does.
So everything is, I'm Haitian, so we didn't speak English when we was at home. Everything was French or Creole. And so as I was growing up, this is when I started to see the division, or me being placed in the label of just African American or black, however you want to call it, and racism would spew itself. So that's how I have seen it as I was growing up into this world. And how does it play, or
what has it been like for you as you come from the Caribbean, and yet you have dark skin, so living in America,
right.
What has that been like for you? and what?
This is our norm, right? This is our norm. Like, we have to be extra cautious. We have to be extra this careful. We have to be extra this when, especially being pulled over by a police officer. So one of the things I was especially started when I was driving, every time if I get pulled over by a police officer, all my windows are down, right? No sudden movements. Tell the officer, listen, I'm gonna go through to my glove compartment and give you what you asked for. So these are the things, and it's always being polite, even if the person's rude. Like, it's as if you're powerless in a sense. So that's how it's all has been. And even if I'm on my passenger side, and one of my Caucasian friends would be driving, the shift is totally different. How they talk to the police officer, how the police officers respond, is totally different. It's as if dark, light and day. I mean, dark and night and day kind of aspect. Yeah. So the situation for me is I always have to be cautious. I tell my friends here is because my boys came to visit me, and
from New York?
From New York, because of my birthday. So they came to visit me, and it was amazing, right? And they was like, "This is a pretty place. It's beautiful. I live in Seattle, Magnolia." And I was like, "I feel more safe in Brooklyn, New York, Brooklyn, right, than I feel in Magnolia." And that's something to talk about, right? Because in Magnolia, it's not a lot of people look like me. So, and I love being at night. I love walking outside at nighttime because it's just peaceful. There's not a lot of people around. But because of my skin, I'm like, I have to go home, just in case someone sees me and say he doesn't belong here, even though I do. And I had to be extra cautious. But in New York City, me and my boys would be outside at night it would cause my mom to worry. We get home at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., but everyone looks like me. We won't call our police on ourselves just because we're walking around the streets. You see what I'm saying? Right. So I'm always had to be cautious. I always had to have this burden on my shoulder to be like, listen, your life is more important than just even trying to experience fresh air outside. So.
And in New York, I hear it's the summertime. You need the fresh air. It gets very
hot
so. and humid. And is this just dealing with this on a day-to-day basis? How stressful is that for you at times, Hanz?
Oh, it's definitely stressful. And biblically, there's a time to cry. There's a time to be happy. We mourn together. So all these senseless killings that I see is as if I'm losing a brother, or it's as if I'm losing a sister.
So it's very personal.
Very personal. You don't know these people, right? But because of that being the injustice of everything that's happened, is just like, man, these are my people at the end of the day, you know? And it's heartbreaking seeing that constantly and nothing is being happened. So it's very, very personal.
Very, very personal. Wow. Hanz, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
Pastor John, what has this issue been like for you, your journey in regards to racial reconciliation and justice?
Well, obviously, my situation is very, very different because I've experienced white privilege and have never had to go through the kinds of experiences that my friends have here. In fact, I grew up, I'm the old timer here. I've been around a long time. And I grew up in Glendale, California, just a few miles north of Los Angeles. And Glendale, California, when I grew up, was what was called a sundown city. That meant that no people of color were allowed in the city after sundown. I can still remember, I was a poor kid, but I had friends who were rich kids. And I remember one family, they, both parents were physicians, and they had an African-American maid. And I remember going to their house and playing, and one evening, the father came in and said to the maid, Ma, we've kept you here too long. I've got to get you home. You can't take the bus home tonight. I'm going to have to drive you home because you won't get out of town before sundown if I let you take the bus. So he drove her over to Altadena, where she lived, a town over. And if police saw someone of color after dark, they would actually pick them up and drive them to the border and let them out. And next podcast, we'll talk about sundown cities, and I'll say a lot more about that. But what I want to talk about are three kind of moments in my life that awakened my interest in and involvement in racial issues. Let me get this up a little bit. Sorry, it keeps coming down. The first incident, as I grew up, my parents were Christians, and they emphasized very strongly that we should respect everyone and not be prejudiced against anyone. And yet there was no outrage about the fact that this was a sundown city, kind of separate but equal was fine with them. When I was 13 years old, I had a history teacher who awakened interest in the subject. Ironically, he was a white South African who had dealt with racial justice in his country and had very strong feelings, a person of real compassion and justice. When I was 13 years old, it was right as the Montgomery bus boycott was going on. Rosa Parks had just, refused to leave her seat in the bus. And so we had to start thinking about all of those things because he brought them to our attention in this history class. And it was there that things really changed, and I began to develop an interest. And of course, then started following Martin Luther King Jr. when I got to college. That was during the years that, of course, he was most active. The March on Washington happened between my junior and senior year of college. So I was very interested in the civil rights movement then during college. In fact, my senior year, we found out that Martin Luther King Jr. was going to speak for a Friday night service at a big synagogue in Hollywood. And we arranged, a group of us, to go in and hear him. Unfortunately, we didn't get to hear him. We made it there, he did not, because I think they kept him in a safe place because no one knew quite what was going on, because that was the very afternoon that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So I never did hear him speak. But that was where the real interest came. But for me, at that point, the awakening only was the idea of not having prejudice and kind of an individual prejudice thing. We need to change laws so that we integrate, but we need to simply, start caring about each other and not being prejudiced. There was another awakening that came the first year that I was in ministry. I was an intern, I was a youth pastor, and the church where I was youth pastor was on the same campus as a hospital. And the pastor, the chaplain of the hospital also was a member of the church, and the pastor and the chaplain got together and said, you know, it would be good if he spent some time in the hospital and got some training there. And they would actually have me write some verbatims, you know, kind of like clinical pastoral education, though it was less formal than that.
Yeah.
So they gave me several beds in the hospital that I would go visit each night. It was a real education for me and a real growing up experience because I had never really dealt with death before. And I remember the first time someone died that I had visited the night before, but when it happened, there were 3 on the same day. So I came back in the morning and 3 of the people I had seen the night before had died. And as I said, it was a growing up experience. But I began to notice that year that about half of my patients were black and about half were white. We were right on the border of a large area of almost entirely black community to the north, white community to the south. And what I noticed was that my white patients got well and went home, and my black patients died. And at first it was just a kind of an observation, and I started thinking, you know, is this really true? So I started keeping statistics. And sure enough, so I started asking questions and began to realize that this is not just a matter of whether people are individually prejudiced, but it's a very systemic issue. That the black patients died because they lived in a different kind of world. They didn't have medical care in their community. Many of them didn't have medical insurance, so they didn't get to the doctor. They didn't even have healthy food in their area. In fact, I had a friend who was in graduate school at the time, going to, in a different city, going to a graduate school that was right in the middle of a large area of black population. And when they went to the grocery store, it was a chain store that was the same as the one they had been going to, where they lived before. And they went in, and where they were used to having beautiful vegetables and fruit, it was all just kind of old. And so my friend's wife went and complained to the manager. And the manager said, well, we kind of bring the things once they get not good enough to sell in the other stores, we bring them here. But just let me know. And whenever you come in, we've got some good stuff in the back for people like you. And she, of course, would never do that. On principle, she said, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So that was where I developed an understanding, really, for the first time, that what we're dealing with is not just a matter of racial prejudice, but we're dealing with systemic issues that have to do with social issues and political issues, much bigger than I had realized. The third moment came in the 80s. I went and spent a summer teaching a group of pastors who were in a graduate program in South Africa. I had students, 35 students from 9 different South African countries, and in South Africa, I had students not only from the other countries, but from within South Africa. I had all the racial groups, what they call blacks and what they call coloreds, and also whites, but Afrikaner whites and British background whites. And there was as much tension between them as there was among the races. And I think what I learned there was just how deep fears go into people's souls and how hard it is to overcome long histories of fear and distrust, and saw people that I thought had genuinely good motives trying to bring reconciliation, but talking past each other and not really understanding each other. And that was kind of the awakening there. So those were just 3 moments in my life that brought new awakenings to me after growing up in this sundown city that I first lived in.
So, what I'm hearing, John, is that those brought it to your awareness, to your heart, and to your mind. Since then, I'm guessing you probably have seen other examples. Your eyes were open, and you were able to see how it's an ongoing. It wasn't just in the '60s.
Oh, no, absolutely.
We still have issues going on.
Oh, absolutely. That awakened me to be able to see, but
Right.
The systemic issues
Right.
are just as real today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just as real.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, John. I grew up in Alaska. I was born in a little town called Dillingham, and then my family moved down to a coastal town called Ketchikan, Alaska, and then later moved back north to Anchorage. And it's interesting that in Ketchikan, Alaska, where most of my growing up years, there was only one African-American family in the whole town. I played baseball with their sons, and we were friends, and I didn't really think much about it. What I was more aware of in Alaska was the relationship with the Native Americans. In our area, there were a lot of Tlingit and Haida tribal people, and I grew up hearing in the community. I grew up hearing racial slurs directed towards the Native Americans. My family, my dad would actually go, and he would go and do Bible studies in a place called Cake, Alaska, which was a Tlingit village. And my parents actually took a Eskimo girl into our home as a foster daughter. Her name was Molly Ann. And so I grew up with a foster sister who was Native American, an Eskimo. And yet there were things that now I'm aware of that I wasn't aware of then. For example, we had, at Christmas time, we always liked to have big bowls of nuts, and you would always be cracking nuts at Christmas time. And there was one nut that they called a strange name, and it was Brazil nuts. And I refused to say, but they used the N-word and then toes to refer to that particular nut. Now, my church-going, great parents, that just taught us that term, and that just shows the ignorance and the lack of sensitivity that was there that I grew up with. When I was in college, again, I was in the dormitory, I was in classes, and I had friends of different races. But I remember seeing things like, I remember there was at a basketball game in the gym. I loved to play basketball, and a white guy I knew and an African-American guy I knew got in an argument, and it didn't come to blows, but they were standing face to face and yelling at each other. And the white guy said something I never forgot. He said, "Why don't you go to your own school?" And again, that just showed me that he wasn't a bad guy, but he had been somewhere within us as human beings. There can be feelings, there can be prejudice that can come to the surface at certain times. When I went to graduate school back in Michigan, I became really aware of the racial tensions, and I remember going to a friend of mine of color and asking him, "I don't understand this," because the friend and I had gone to Walla Walla University together, and it wasn't that way there. And I said, "What is this about?" He said, "Bill, you need to read 2 books, The Autobiography of Malcolm X and Black Like Me." So I read them, and it opened my eyes, and I was amazed how little of the history of the racial tension in America, how little of it I had grown up hearing. I was just amazed how bad it was, and yet how little of it that I know. That awakened within me an idea that I don't want to be part of something ugly. I don't want to be a part of, as a person of faith, if God made all of us in his image, then if I disrespect or feel superior to someone made in his image, I'm actually being disrespectful to the Creator. And so I have kept learning and kept trying to grow, and this is something that I care about deeply, and I care about it deeply because I believe as people of faith that we should be leaders in the area of reconciliation and bringing people together. Now, Mimi, do you mind if I ask you, in your opinion, what is at stake for our country, for as people of faith, what is at stake in this issue? Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil right now. Why is this issue important, and what's at stake, in your opinion?
There's plenty at stake. Our salvation is at stake. It's important because this is not the way that we were created to be as brothers and sisters. We weren't created to be set apart from each other. And I believe God is an amazing artist and a creator because he's not boring. He's actually has quite a sense of humor, and
He does.
he's a great architect of character and people. And look at us. But because and he wanted us as Christians to be peculiar people. I think what is at stake is our peculiarity, and I've mentioned this before to you all, and we've lost it. We don't have it, and so we're not distinct from society when we're supposed to be. And like you had said, we can, if you disrespect each other because of how we look or where we're from, then we're disrespecting the Creator. And I think that is at stake. We cannot do that. This is important because the way this world is going, we don't have time to continue this way. We don't. I know for me, I am just weary of all of it. It's just draining, and it takes something from your soul. Like Hanz said, someone senselessly gets shot and you lose a brother or sister. You feel it deeply. And I think that's where we need to build our bridges with each other. I've heard it said we're more alike than we're not. And Pastor John, you said our fears, take over. And that's when we start ripping each other apart, And we've seen it in the streets of Brooklyn. We've seen it all over the place. So it's just, that's what's at stake. We need to be peculiar, and we need to stop ripping each other apart.
Okay, thank you, Mimi. Hanz, what's at stake in this for you?
To be bluntly honest, what I believe that's at stake is two things. Christianity will be at stake, right? The correct way, or the real Christianity, like the real way, the correct way to follow Christ, that will be at stake. Because as we know, we were made in God's image. Men, women were made in God's image. And if we have this racial tension, if with racism being, I guess, fueled by whatever is happening within the world and within our church, Christianity is at stake. It's one of the things I would say. And second would be humanity in itself. Nelson Mandela says this, we were not, I'll paraphrase or try to quote him correctly, but he says, no person was born hating another person because of their background or because of their religion or how they look. We were taught to hate. And if we were taught to hate, we can be taught to love, because love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. That's humanity at its whole. If we have this racial tension, racism, we let racism and bigotry and ignorance infiltrate humanity, humanity is at stake. Like, because we are human. You know what I mean? We are all one race, the human race. But if we hear like, well, I'm better because I look lighter, or because I'm thinner, or whatever the case might be, that in itself, humanity will be at stake. That's what I believe.
Because we share this planet.
We share this planet. We all bleed the same blood.
We
you
do.
know what I mean? And we all were created in God's image.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. John, in your opinion,
Say amen to what they've said. The gospel is at stake. Theologians argue about what's the most important word in Paul's theology. Is it faith? Is it grace? Is it righteousness? I think that probably his absolute most important word is all. All. For the gospel is for all. God wants to have, he says in Romans 11, mercy on all. And if we forget that all, why, we just don't have the gospel. I think of Abraham Joshua Heschel, the Jewish theologian and philosopher, said God is every person's pedigree. He is the father of everyone, or he is the father of no one. No one has a place in his kingdom who tries to keep another person in their place.
boy, you just took us in the deep end of the pool, John. For me, what's at stake in this issue is hope. All of us know the world is very broken. People are in a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of things that should not be the way they are. Too many women, children, and boys are trafficked. There's just real problems in our world. And for people of faith, we believe there's hope. But the world is very racially polarized, and if they see us as people of faith as racially polarized too, then that erodes that we have hope to offer. And I believe this world really, really needs hope. So I also believe that what is at stake is we saw in Nazi Germany, we saw what happens when racism is unfettered and just turned loose. This is a microcosm. This is a test tube of what happens when racism, and it's ugly, and it destroys the humanity of the soul. And I have friends who lived in Germany during that time, and they don't like to talk about it. It's a time of great pain and great shame for them. And America is a country founded on amazing ideals. And like Dr. King says, we just want to live up to the ideals that our country is supposed to be about. I want to close with this. Mimi, I'm going to start with you again. What gives you hope? Obviously, we're struggling in our world, in our country now. But this podcast is about looking forward. Mm-hmm. It's about reconciliation. Yeah. What gives you hope?
Wow. That a better day, there's always a better day. This too shall pass. Mm-hmm. We don't know when in our lifetimes, but it will pass. What gives me hope is my boys. Seeing them grow, watching them grow, and that they survive every day. What gives me hope is that this will end. And I know there's a heavenly home for all of us. It won't be segregated. No. It will not be for this person or that group or whomever. It will be for all. And that gives me hope. When I see every act of kindness that I see, every act of love that I see in the midst of all of this trauma gives me hope. And I think we without hope we couldn't survive. Yeah.
Hanz, what gives you hope?
We battle not against flesh and blood. That right there gives me hope, right? So whenever I see some kind of racism and I want to react in the ways of Malcolm X, I just think to myself, we battle not against flesh and blood. the enemy is at this core root of this problem, right? The enemy hates, he was not there when creation was happening, so the enemy hates that. So he wants us to hate ourselves. So I think about it, I'm just like, we battle not against flesh and blood. God, help this person see that the enemy is using them to further the enemy's kingdom. And we need to break out of that. Just because we sit in a church, we're part of this great organization, this great religion, this Christianity thing, that doesn't mean that Satan doesn't use you in certain ways. So let God open our eyes to see that, listen, you are not at the right path, because hate is not of me, racism is not of me, and we battle against the principalities. Flesh and blood is not what we battle with. So
Thank you, Hanz. John, what gives you hope?
Well, for one thing, I see in a younger generation hope. I really think that there is an awareness and an awakening in young people today that gives me hope. But ultimately, the hope is, as Hanz says, I think of what Paul says in Romans 8, that hope that's seen isn't hope. But we can't even begin to compare what's coming with any suffering that we might see now. And I don't think that's just in the future Paul's talking about. I mean, in a new world. I think he expects us to start living that kingdom now.
What gives me hope is what's happening right now. Is when you have, here are the four of us, two people of color, two Caucasians. We love each other, and we're united that we want to see a better world. We want to see a better community, and we want, as people of faith, to move forward, and we want there to be reconciliation. One of the things I really believe is you can only clean up the garbage on your side of the street. I can't change what the Senate, what the Congress, what the president does, but I can affect the atmosphere around me, and I can stand in solidarity with people of faith or people of good heart, and we can work together. And what gives me hope also is empathy. The idea that as human beings, when we listen to each other's stories, it promotes understanding, and we can move forward. There's a scripture verse in 2 Corinthians 7:2. It says, "Make room for us in your hearts." And so on this podcast, we want to do that. We want to make room in our hearts for other people, for other points of view. We don't have to always agree, but we always want to respect each other, and we want to move forward with understanding, because we want to bring glory to God, and we want this world to be a better place. Our next podcast, we will deal with 3 crucial terms in understanding racial reconciliation. We're going to talk about green books, we're going to talk about sundown cities, and we're going to talk about redlining in an attempt to understand some of these dynamics in our culture, and then ways we can move forward towards healing. Thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of John and Mimi and Hanz and myself, we look forward to more conversations and making room in our hearts for each other. Thank you for being with us.